The galaxy had long regarded humanity as a curiosity, an insignificant species huddled on a blue planet orbiting an unremarkable star, their technological advancements considered rudimentary and their military capabilities laughable at best. Yet in the council chambers of the great alien empires, whispers of Earth persisted, often accompanied by derisive laughter and condescending speculation that humans would never rise beyond their primitive limitations. And for decades humanity endured this dismissal, quietly observing the conflicts that scarred the stars, studying the advanced tactics and technologies of alien civilizations, while keeping their own progress hidden behind a veil of seeming simplicity, never revealing the depths of their strategic ingenuity, the breadth of their scientific breakthroughs, or the secret construction of their formidable fleet of warships that far exceeded any expectation the galaxy could imagine. And it began with the first reconnaissance drone sent beyond the solar system. Small and seemingly harmless devices that return with unprecedented amount of data on alien propulsion systems, energy weapons, defensive technologies, and tactical patterns, analyzed by teams of scientists, engineers, and military strategists who synthesize this information into an intricate understanding of galactic warfare, allowing humanity to anticipate movements, counter strategies, and develop their own methods of stealth, subterfuge, and overwhelming force. And as decades passed, the human fleets grew in secrecy, hidden within asteroid fields, cloaked behind gravitational anomalies, or masked by sophisticated holographic arrays, each ship a testament to human ingenuity, designed to be faster, more maneuverable, and more resilient than anything the galaxy had previously encountered. And yet the aliens remained oblivious, distracted by their own internal rivalries, wars, and petty disputes, confident that any threat from Earth was negligible until the first reports came in from the edge of the Orion sector, where a small contingent of human ships had intercepted and dismantled an alien survey fleet without firing a single shot, using advanced electronic warfare to manipulate enemy sensors, disable communications, and turn their own weapons against them, leaving alien commanders stunned and scrambling to understand how such a minor species could exhibit such precise control over advanced systems. And word of these victories traveled, slowly at first, then exponentially, as humans target key supply lines, research stations, and communication hubs, all while maintaining the appearance of normalcy in human-populated systems, giving the galaxy no reason to suspect the scope of what was brewing, and the aliens dismissed every report as exaggeration or propaganda, until a full-scale confrontation occurred near the Tau Ceti cluster, where an entire armada of alien warships, confident in their superiority, approached what they assumed was a defenseless human outpost, only to be met with a calculated ambush, a coordinated strike that neutralized their flagship before it had called for reinforcements, disabling hundreds of vessels in minutes while human pilots and commanders executed maneuvers that alien strategists had never conceived possible. And in the aftermath, as the surviving alien commanders fled in disarray, transmissions intercepted revealed disbelief, fear, and frantic questioning of how supposedly primitive species could wield such power. And from that moment, the tide of perception began to shift, though the war had only just begun, with humanity still holding back the full extent of their capabilities, revealing only enough to instill dread, while reserving their ultimate strategies and technologies for the decisive moments when the galaxy would finally understand that humans were not to be underestimated. And the story continued across multiple star systems, from the densely populated human colonies in Alpha Centauri to the hidden shipyards in the Kuiper Belt, where engineers and pilots worked tirelessly to expand the fleet, to the cybernetics labs on Mars refining neural interfaces that allowed humans to process information at speeds unmatched by alien AI, to the clandestine diplomatic missions where human ambassadors subtly manipulated rival alien factions into temporary truces, all pieces in a grand strategy that only the humans fully understood, and the aliens, meanwhile, remained blinded by hubris, underestimating the depth of human cunning, resilience, and willingness to sacrifice for protection of their species, leading to a series of battles across the Orion, Sirius, and Vega sectors in which humans executed strategies that combined deceptive retreats, precision strikes, and psychological operations, causing alien fleets to overextend, misallocate resources, and underestimate the patience and long-term planning of humanity, while humans developed specialized weapons that targeted alien vulnerabilities, From plasma disruptors tuned to exotic energy signatures to adaptive shielding that rendered enemy torpedoes ineffective. And on the political front, human leaders coordinated across thousands of star systems, maintaining morale, secrecy, and unity in a species that had once been fractured, proving that their strength lay not only in technology, but in the cohesion, loyalty, and ingenuity of their population. And as human fleets moved closer to the heart of the alien empire, every engagement further shattered the illusion of human inferiority. Alien soldiers began reporting inexplicable phenomena, from invisible ships slipping through patrols to sudden energy surges that disabled their warships without warning, causing panic among officers who had never faced a foe capable of such coordinated and multifaceted tactics. And this momentum allowed humanity to seize control of critical star routes, cut off supply chains, and systematically dismantle alien infrastructure, all while maintaining the facade of a defensive stance, letting the aliens underestimate their intentions and capabilities at every turn. And the galaxy watched in astonishment as humans, once thought incapable of sustaining interstellar conflict, demonstrated mastery of combined arms tactics, orbital bombardments with surgical precision, cyber warfare that turned alien intelligence networks against themselves, and guerrilla operations executed in systems previously considered impenetrable. And in one pivotal confrontation near the Epsilon Eridani sector, a massive alien fleet assembled to crush humanity in what they believed to be a decisive engagement, only to find themselves surrounded, outmaneuvered, and overwhelmed by humans who had anticipated every move, exploiting alien weaknesses while avoiding their strengths. And after hours of intense combat that left entire fleets incapacitated, the surviving alien commanders were forced to surrender, shocked by the realization that humans had meticulously orchestrated every aspect of the battle, leveraging their understanding of alien psychology, strategy, and technology to achieve complete dominance with minimal losses. And the aftermath of this engagement sent shockwaves across the galaxy as human transmissions broadcast the terms of surrender, revealing the extent of their technological superiority, strategic brilliance, and capacity for unity, demonstrating that humanity had evolved from an underestimated species into the dominant force in multiple sectors, capable of turning adversity into advantage. And the alien empires were left to reconsider everything they had believed about humans, as scholars, diplomats, and military leaders struggled to comprehend how a species dismissed as insignificant had orchestrated such a comprehensive campaign of victory. And this marked only the beginning of humanity's resurgence, as they systematically expanded their influence, rebuilt devastated systems with efficiency, unmatched by alien bureaucracies, implemented defense networks that protected colonies from retaliation, and forged alliances based on respect rather than fear, all while preparing for the next phase of their strategy, revealing to the galaxy that humans were patient, intelligent, resilient, and, above all, never to be underestimated. And as humanity's fleets continued to advance, each encounter with alien forces became a demonstration of superior tactics, faster ships, adaptive weaponry, and the indomitable spirit of a species that had endured millennia of disregard, oppression, and dismissal, transforming every battle into a lesson that would resonate across civilizations, cementing humanity's reputation as a force that combines scientific innovation, strategic genius, and unbreakable resolve, proving conclusively that any empire which had underestimated them did so at its peril, and that the stars themselves would bear witness to humanity's rise, their hidden fleet no longer a secret, their power undeniable, and their place in the galaxy cemented by courage, intellect, and an unwavering determination to ensure that no species, no matter how advanced, would ever consider humanity weak again. The shock that rippled through the alien empire after defeats in the outer sectors did not immediately lead to humility or restraint, but instead triggered anger, denial, and a desperate need to reassert dominance. And within a vast imperial capital orbiting a swollen red star, senior commanders gathered in fortified halls arguing over how a species so recently dismissed could dismantle fleets that had ruled the stars for centuries, with some insisting the losses were statistical anomalies, while others quietly feared that humanity represented a new kind of enemy whose methods defied traditional doctrine. And as these debates dragged on, humanity continued to move with deliberate calm, consolidating captured systems, repairing damaged infrastructure, and learning from every engagement. While on Earth and its colonies, leaders such as Admiral Daniel Carter coordinated strategy with defense analysts like Laura Bennett and fleet tacticians such as Kevin Morales, Individuals hardened by decades of preparation, who understood that the most dangerous phase of any conflict came after early victories, when an overconfident enemy lashed out with brute force. And so humanity prepared for that inevitability, reinforcing defensive grids, rotating fleets through hidden resupply points, and deploying misinformation campaigns that fed alien intelligence services carefully crafted narratives of human exhaustion and logistical strain, encouraging the Empire to commit to a massive counteroffensive. And the bait worked, because deep within the alien empire, Supreme Commander Kether authorized Operation Final Silence, a plan to gather overwhelming force and crush humanity in a single, brutal strike aimed at Earth itself. Believing that decapitating the human homeworld would shatter morale and end resistance, and this decision revealed a core flaw in alien thinking, the belief that fear alone could break humans, a belief born of centuries of dealing with species that fractured under existential threat. And as the alien armada assembled, spanning thousands of warships and escorted by planet killers and carrier swarms, humanity watched in silence, tracking every movement through quantum sensors embedded in subspace, mapping the armada's path long before it crossed into contested space. And instead of rushing to meet it head-on, human leadership chose patience, allowing the armada to advance deeper, stretching its supply lines and committing its full weight to a singular objective. While human fleets repositioned along predicted routes, each task force assigned a precise role in the coming storm. And among the human crews there was tension but not fear, because they had trained for the scenario for generations, passing down doctrine that emphasized adaptability, mutual trust, and the willingness to act independently if communications failed. And as the alien armada crossed into the outer Sol defensive perimeter, they encountered only light. Resistance, a handful of human ships retreating after brief skirmishes, confirming the alien belief that humanity was weakening. Yet each engagement fed more data back to human analysts, refining targeting algorithms and predicting command behaviors with chilling accuracy. And when the armada reached what the aliens believed was the final approach to Earth, the trap closed as human stealth platforms activated across the system, severing subspace lanes, isolating segments of the fleet from one another, and unleashing precision strikes that disabled command ships and logistics vessels first, sowing confusion as alien formations lost coordination. And in the chaos, human strike groups emerged from unexpected vectors, exploiting blind spots in alien sensor coverage that humans had studied for decades, delivering concentrated fire that crippled capital ships without annihilating them, because the goal was not annihilation but control. And alien commanders, accustomed to overwhelming force and rigid hierarchies, struggled to respond as their doctrine collapsed under the weight of an enemy that refused to behave predictably. And throughout the battle, human communications remained calm and concise, with commanders issuing clear objectives and trusting subordinates to execute creatively, a stark contrast to the alien chain of command that demanded constant authorization and collapsed when leaders were incapacitated. And as hours turned into days, the once unstoppable armada found itself fragmented, surrounded, and slowly neutralized, its weapon systems rendered useless by adaptive countermeasures that evolved in real time. And when the final alien flagship was boarded by human marines, its commander demanded to know why humanity had hidden its strength for so long. And the response was simple: that humans had learned early in their history that survival favored those who prepared quietly and struck decisively. And the fall of the armada sent a message across the galaxy more powerful than any broadcast, that humanity could defeat the greatest concentration of force the Empire could muster. And in the aftermath, rather than raising captured ships and worlds, humans offered terms that emphasized coexistence, demilitarization, and shared governance, shocking observers who expected vengeance. And this restraint further unsettled the alien political order, as populations began questioning leaders who had led them into catastrophic defeat against a species that now demonstrated not only superior strategy but moral confidence. And while negotiations began under human oversight, humanity did not relax, continuing to fortify defenses and monitor rival factions, understanding that the galaxy was vast and that the lesson of underestimation would need to be reinforced through vigilance, not arrogance. And so the second phase of humanity's rise unfolded not as a conquest of annihilation, but as a restructuring of galactic power, with humans positioned not merely as warriors, but as architects of a new balance, one forged through patience, preparation, and the unyielding resolve of a species that had been underestimated for far too long. As the consequences of the Armada's defeat spread to the galaxy, the alien empire fractured along ideological and political lines, with governors, admirals, and counselors arguing over responsibility and survival, while humanity observed carefully, understanding that chaos was both an opportunity and a danger, and within the secured Sol system, human leadership convened to reassess priorities, with figures like Admiral Daniel Carter, Ambassador Helen Brooks, and Fleet Commander Aaron Collins reviewing intelligence that showed multiple alien client states quietly withdrawing support from the Empire, fearful that continued allegiance would invite human retaliation, and instead of exploiting this fear with overt threats, humanity pursued a strategy of controlled stability, reopening trade corridors under human protection, restoring damaged communication relays, and offering security guarantees that were conditional on neutrality rather than submission. And this subtle approach reshaped perception faster than military victories ever could, because alien merchants, civilians, and even lower-ranking officers experienced a level of order and predictability that had been absent under imperial rule. And while these diplomatic efforts unfolded, the remnants of the alien military attempted to regroup, consolidating surviving fleets around core worlds, hoping to buy time to adapt to human tactics. Yet every attempt at secrecy failed, as human intelligence networks built on decentralized analysis rather than singular command nodes, detected shifts in deployment patterns almost immediately, allowing human task forces to shadow alien movements without engaging, applying psychological pressure through constant presence rather than open combat. And this persistent pressure eroded morale, as alien crews realized they were never unobserved, never fully secure, and never able to dictate the terms of engagement. And on the human side, shipyards expanded production at a measured pace, not in a frantic rush, but through optimized manufacturing that prioritized reliability and modular upgrades, enabling fleets to adapt continuously without halting operations, and scientists refined battlefield learning systems that integrated combat data directly into tactical simulations, allowing commanders to rehearse likely scenarios minutes after an engagement ended. And this feedback loop gave humans an accelerating advantage that alien doctrine, rooted in static hierarchies and tradition, could not match. And the next major test came when a coalition of alien houses, unwilling to accept human ascendancy yet distrustful of imperial leadership, launched a surprise offensive against a lightly defended human-aligned system, believing a quick victory would demonstrate that humans could not be everywhere at once. But this assumption ignored the fundamental shift in human warfare philosophy, which emphasized distributed response over centralized defense. And, within hours of the first attack, autonomous human squadrons converged from multiple directions, coordinated through encrypted burst communications that denied the attackers any clear target or pattern. And the engagement unfolded not as a single battle, but as dozens of overlapping skirmishes, each one isolating and dismantling enemy units before they could regroup. And when the coalition forces withdrew, they left behind disabled ships and stunned commanders who had expected slow mobilization rather than instantaneous response. And this failure convinced many neutral systems that resistance was futile, not because humans were omnipotent, but because they were adaptable beyond prediction. And as this realization took hold, the Galactic Council, long a symbolic body dominated by imperial influence, convened an emergency session to reassess humanity's status. And human representatives entered those chambers not as petitioners, but as equals, presenting evidence of compliance, reconstruction, and security improvements in regions under their protection, forcing alien delegates to confront a reality where humanity's rise was not marked by chaos, but by increased stability. And while some counselors argued that this was merely a temporary phase before human domination hardened into tyranny, others recognized that humanity's restraint after decisive victories indicated a different model of power, one that valued leverage over destruction. And throughout these debates, human fleets remained active but restrained, responding decisively to aggression while avoiding provocation, reinforcing the narrative that humanity did not seek endless war, but would not tolerate being challenged from a position of assumed weakness. And within the alien empire's core worlds, civilian unrest grew as populations questioned why their leaders had dismissed warnings and provoked a conflict they could not win, leading to resignations, internal power struggles, and even localized rebellions, all of which further weakened coordinated resistance. And humanity, observing this fragmentation, chose not to intervene directly, understanding that imposed solutions bred resentment, instead preparing contingency plans for humanitarian corridors, evacuation support, and system stabilization should collapse turn violent. And this foresight further distinguished humans from previous galactic powers, whose victories were often followed by neglect and exploitation. And as months passed, it became clear that the galaxy was entering a new equilibrium, one shaped less by raw force and more by the credible threat of it combined with demonstrated responsibility. And in this environment, humanity's reputation transformed from underestimated upstart to benchmark power, the standard against which all emerging civilizations would be measured. And yet within human command circles, there was no celebration, only cautious determination, because they understood that history favored those who forgot their own lessons. And so training continued, research accelerated, and doctrines evolved, ensuring that humanity would never again be caught unprepared, and that the memory of being underestimated would remain not as a grievance, but as a guiding principle, shaping a future where humanity's strength lay not just in its ability to strike back, but in its resolve to ensure that such a strike would never again be necessary. The shift toward a fragile stability did not end the conflict, but transformed it into a quieter, more dangerous phase, where intent mattered more than firepower, and perception could decide outcomes before fleets ever clashed. And within this environment, humanity demonstrated another capability the galaxy had never attributed to them: strategic patience at a civilizational scale, because instead of pressing their advantage through conquest, human leadership focused on shaping conditions that made renewed aggression irrational. And this began with a comprehensive mapping of economic dependencies across dozens of alien regions, identify which systems relied on shared infrastructure, which depended on imperial logistics, and which suffered most under the disruption of war. And through coordinated efforts led by planners like Secretary Nathan Cole and systems analyst Rebecca Moore, humans initiated targeted reconstruction projects that restored energy grids, stabilized trade routes, and reactivated medical networks and systems willing to accept neutral oversight. And these actions were not framed as charity, but as mutually beneficial stabilization, creating incentives for cooperation that quietly undermined remaining hardline factions. And while diplomats worked these channels, the military remained deeply engaged in silent deterrence, deploying layered sensor webs and rapid response units that could intercept threats before they materialized. And this posture sent a clear signal, without the need for threats, that any attempt to exploit human restraint would be met with swift, overwhelming response. And alien commanders, reviewing engagement data from earlier defeats, understood that this was not posturing but a proven capability. And so overt attacks dwindled, replaced by espionage, sabotage, and political maneuvering. And in this arena, too, humanity proved unexpectedly adept, having refined counterintelligence methods during centuries of internal conflict on Earth, methods that emphasize redundancy, compartmentalization, and the assumption that any system could be compromised. And when an alien covert cell attempted to destabilize a human-aligned colony by disrupting its atmospheric processors, human security forces neutralized the threat quietly, restoring systems before civilians even realized there had been danger. And the absence of visible crisis further reinforced trust in human oversight, contrasting sharply with the alien empires' historical pattern of harsh reprisals and public crackdowns. And this difference resonated deeply among populations long accustomed to rule by fear. And as confidence grew, requests for human mediation increased, drawing humanity into disputes that had simmered for generations. And rather than imposing solutions, human negotiators facilitated frameworks that required rival parties to articulate shared interests and long-term costs, leveraging data-driven projections that showed how continued conflict would degrade entire regions. And this analytical approach appealed even to skeptical alien leaders, who found it difficult to argue against outcomes quantified with such clarity. And through these processes, humanity's influence expanded organically, not through banners or occupation forces, but through systems that functioned better under their guidance. And yet this expansion was not without internal debate, as some human commanders argued that restraint risked emboldening future threats, while others warned that dominance without legitimacy would recreate the same cycles that had led to war. And these debates were resolved not through ideology, but through evidence, as ongoing monitoring showed declining military expenditures among former adversaries and increasing interdependence between systems. indicators that the strategy was working, and still, humanity prepared for the worst, because history had taught them that periods of peace often masked brewing resentment. And so, war colleges updated curricula to include alien doctrines, cultural psychology, and hybrid conflict scenarios, ensuring future leaders would not rely solely on technological advantage. And in one telling incident, a splinter faction within the alien empire attempted to seize control of a remote shipyard to rebuild forbidden weapons, believing humanity too distracted to respond. But within hours, human forces isolated the site, disabled its power systems, and detained the leadership, without a single casualty, broadcasting the operation afterward as a factual report rather than a threat. And this transparency had a chilling effect, demonstrating that secrecy offered no protection, and that humanity's reach was precise, informed, and restrained. And as these patterns repeated, the narrative across the galaxy shifted again, from fear of human power to acceptance of human permanence. And younger alien generations grew up knowing a galaxy where humans were central actors, not anomalies, studying human history and doctrine not as curiosities, but as foundational knowledge. And this cultural shift may have been the most profound consequence of the war, because it embedded the lesson of underestimation into collective memory, not as a tale of humiliation, but as a cautionary example of what happens when arrogance blinds judgment. And within human society, this recognition reinforced a sober understanding of responsibility, because they knew that the role they now occupied would shape the galaxy for centuries, and that every action, every restraint, and every decisive strike would be remembered. And so humanity continued forward not as conquerors celebrating victory, but as guardians of hard-won balance, fully aware that their greatest strength was not the fleets they commanded or the weapons they wielded, but the discipline to remember what it felt like to be dismissed, ignored, and underestimated, and a determination to ensure that power, once earned, would never be exercised carelessly again. The consolidation of humanity's role as the stabilizing force of the galaxy did not end tension, but reshaped it into a constant undercurrent, a pressure that demanded vigilance and foresight. And within human strategic circles, this period became known as the Long Watch, a phase where success depended not on dramatic victories, but on preventing crises before they ignited. And Admiral Daniel Carter, now overseeing a dispersed command network rather than a centralized fleet, emphasized to his officers that complacency would undo everything they had achieved, reminding them that the alien empire had fallen not because it lacked power, but because it failed to adapt. And so humanity institutionalized adaptability, embedding continuous review into every layer of governance and defense. And this approach soon faced its greatest test when signals emerged from beyond the mapped regions of known space, faint but unmistakably artificial, indicating the presence of a previously uncontacted civilization observing the recent conflicts from a distance. An initial analysis suggested a technologically advanced society that had remained hidden by choice, monitoring the galaxy's power shifts to determine whether humanity represented a threat or an opportunity. And this discovery triggered intense debate among human leaders, with some advocating for preemptive contact to shape first impressions, while others warned that premature engagement could reveal too much. And ultimately a cautious middle path was chosen, sending a limited diplomatic probe supported by covert observation, designed to communicate openness without vulnerability. And this decision reflected a maturity forged through hard experience, understanding that first contact carried consequences beyond immediate outcomes. And as the probe advanced, humanity's intelligence division simultaneously detected renewed agitation within remnants of the alien empire, where displaced elites, stripped of authority and resources, sought external allies to reclaim relevance, and intercepted communications revealed attempts to signal this hidden civilization, framing humanity as an emerging tyrant that must be checked before it dominated the galaxy. And this narrative, though distorted, carried emotional weight among those who had lost status and identity. And humanity recognized the danger not in the immediate military threat, but in the potential for misaligned perceptions to catalyze a new coalition against them. And so human strategists coordinated a response that addressed both fronts simultaneously, accelerating transparency initiatives within known systems to demonstrate accountability, while preparing evidence-based briefings for potential new contacts that documented the sequence of events leading to the war, including the alien empire's initial aggression and humanity's restrained response. And this reliance on documented fact rather than rhetoric became a hallmark of human influence, disarming propaganda by confronting it with verifiable reality. And when the diplomatic probe finally received a response, it was measured and analytical, requesting clarification on humanity's governance model, military doctrine, and long-term intentions, questions that revealed both caution and curiosity, and humanity responded in kind, outlining their decentralized authority structures, civilian oversight mechanisms, and commitment to mutual defense rather than expansion, and crucially, they included data on how systems under human protection had experienced reduced conflict and improved quality of life, allowing the observers to draw their own conclusions. And this exchange unfolded over weeks, building a foundation of trust that alien dissidents struggled to undermine. And meanwhile, within the human-aligned regions, subtle shift in culture emerged as citizens adjusted to life without constant threat, redirecting innovation toward exploration, medicine, and infrastructure rather than weapons alone. And this diversification strengthened humanity's position further, because it reduced dependence on perpetual conflict as a unifying force. And yet the memory of war remained vivid enough to sustain readiness. And when a coordinated attempt by alien hardliners to stage simultaneous uprisings across multiple systems was detected, humanity responded with precision, deploying stabilization teams, information campaigns, and targeted arrests that dismantled the effort before it could escalate. And the failure of this last major resistance effectively ended organized opposition, leaving only isolated actors without the capacity to challenge the new order. And as the galaxy settled into this transformed state, historians began to frame the conflict not as a war of conquest, but as a turning point where power ceased to be defined solely by domination. And humanity's role in this narrative was complex, admired by some, resented by others, but undeniable in its impact. And within human society, there was no illusion that this balance was permanent, only a shared understanding that vigilance, restraint, and adaptability must continue, because the same traits that had once made humanity easy to dismiss could, if forgotten, make them vulnerable again. And so the long watch continued, guided by the hard-earned knowledge that the true measure of strength was not the ability to strike back, but the wisdom to know when not to, even as the capability remained ever present. The galaxy's gradual acceptance of humanity's role did not eliminate uncertainty, but normalized it, embedding a quiet awareness that power now rested with a species that had learned restraint through hardship. And as years passed, this awareness reshaped institutions, doctrines, and expectations across countless systems. While within human command structures, the Long Watch evolved into a refined practice of anticipation rather than reaction, with predictive models continuously updated by streams of economic, political, and social data flowing in from allied and neutral regions alike. And figures like Director Samuel Harper and Logistics Coordinator Elaine Turner emphasized that early detection of imbalance was more valuable than any fleet mobilization. And this philosophy was tested when a distant cluster previously considered marginal began exhibiting abnormal energy signatures consistent with large-scale industrial buildup. An initial analysis suggested convergence of displaced alien engineers, mercenary groups, and ideological extremists pooling resources to create an independent power base beyond established oversight. And while some advocated for immediate intervention to prevent another hostile force from emerging, humanity chose observation first, deploying long-range sensors and covert envoys to understand motivations rather than assume intent. And what they discovered was not a unified enemy, but a fragmented movement driven by fear of irrelevance in a galaxy now structured around human-mediated stability. And this insight reframed the challenge from military to existential, because these groups did not seek conquest but recognition, and humanity recognized echoes of its own past when it struggled against dismissal. And so instead of deploying warships, they initiated a calculated outreach, offering integration pathways, technical assistance, and representation within broader frameworks in exchange for transparency and demilitarization. And while not all factions accepted, enough did to fracture the movement's cohesion, isolating hardliners who lacked broad support. And this strategy prevented escalation without bloodshed, reinforcing the perception that humanity understood the psychological roots of conflict, not just its manifestations. And meanwhile, the hidden civilization, observing from afar, completed its assessment, concluding that humanity represented a stabilizing variable rather than a destabilizing one. And formal contact was established through a joint conference that marked one of the most significant diplomatic events in galactic history, as two major powers engaged without pretense or hostility. and the observers revealed themselves as a civilization that had survived a near-extinction event caused by unchecked expansion and had chosen seclusion as a defense. And their interest in humanity stemmed from seeing a species rise rapidly yet resist the temptation to dominate indiscriminately, and this revelation resonated deeply within human circles, validating the choices made during and after the war. And the ensuing exchange of knowledge expanded understanding of long-term survival on a galactic scale, introducing concepts of sustainability and equilibrium that further influence human policy. And as these ideas diffused, even former adversaries began to adapt, shifting from militarized competition toward cooperative resilience. And while distrust did not vanish, it was tempered by shared interest in avoiding the catastrophic cycles that had scarred history, and humanity's fleets gradually transitioned from war footing to guardianship, still formidable but increasingly integrated into multi-species security arrangements that distributed responsibility rather than centralizing it. And this distribution reduced the symbolic weight of human dominance while preserving its practical effectiveness. And within human society, cultural narratives evolved to reflect this maturation, emphasizing the lessons of being underestimated not as a source of pride alone, but as a reminder of vulnerability. And education systems incorporated interstellar history that highlighted both human achievements and mistakes, fostering a generation that viewed strength as inseparable from accountability. And yet, even as this equilibrium solidified, humanity did not dismantle its capacity to strike back, understanding that deterrence required credibility. And so, research continued into defensive technologies, rapid response systems, and contingency planning for unknown threats beyond current horizons. Because the universe remained vast and unpredictable, and the story of humanity's rise served as both inspiration and warning, demonstrating how quickly power dynamics could shift, and how essential was to guide that shift with intention. And as the Long Watch entered its next phase, humanity stood not at the end of conflict, but at the threshold of a new era where their greatest challenge would be sustaining the balance they fought so hard to achieve, knowing that the galaxy now measured itself against the standard they had set, and that the memory of underestimation, once a source of grievance, had become the foundation of a responsibility that could never be set aside. The emergence of a more balanced galaxy did not bring an end to uncertainty, only a deeper awareness that stability was an active process rather than a permanent state. And humanity learned this when subtle anomalies began appearing at the fringes of charted space, regions where censored data behaved inconsistently, and established physical models failed to fully explain observed phenomena. And while no hostile intent was immediately evident, the irregularities raised concern among analysts who understood that the greatest threats often arrived without warning. And so, under the guidance of coordinators like Jonathan Price and systems scientist Amanda Lewis, humanity initiated a comprehensive exploration initiative that combined scientific inquiry with defensive preparedness, sending specialized vessels designed not for combat, but for observation, adaptability, and rapid retreat if necessary. And this approach reflected a lesson deeply ingrained from past conflict, that knowledge gathered early could prevent catastrophic miscalculation later. And as these missions progressed, they encountered remnants of ancient structures scattered across dead systems, evidence of civilizations that had risen and fallen long before humanity reached the stars. And analysis revealed patterns of overexpansion, resource exhaustion, and internal collapse, reinforcing the idea that unchecked dominance was a self-defeating path. And these discoveries were shared openly with allied systems, sparking renewed commitment to cooperative frameworks that prioritize sustainability over short-term advantage. And yet, even as these efforts unfolded, intelligence reports indicated growing unease among some species who feared that humanity's influence, however restrained, left little room for independent ambition. And rather than dismiss these concerns, human diplomats invited critics into policy discussions, allowing dissenting voices to shape future agreements, a move that diffused tension by transforming opposition into participation. And this inclusive approach further distinguished humanity from previous hegemonic powers, whose rule had been characterized by exclusion and coercion. And within human military circles, training evolved to emphasize the escalation as a core competency, teaching officers to recognize when restraint achieved more than force, while still maintaining readiness to respond decisively if deterrence failed. And this dual focus was tested when an isolated incident involving a misinterpreted maneuver nearly triggered a confrontation between rival fleets. But human mediators intervened in real time, providing transparent sensor data and facilitating communication that prevented escalation, turning a potential flashpoint into a case study in crisis management. And such incidents gradually built confidence that the new balance could withstand stress without reverting to violence. And as years passed, the narrative of humanity as the underestimated, underdog transformed into a more nuanced understanding of a species that had learned from being overlooked, using that experience to build systems designed to endure rather than dominate. And within human culture, art, literature, and public discourse reflected this shift, exploring themes of responsibility, memory, and the cost of survival, ensuring that the emotional lessons of the war were not lost to abstraction, and when the anniversary of the first decisive battle was observed, it was marked not by celebration but by reflection, honoring the restraint shown after victory as much as the courage displayed during conflict. And this attitude resonated across species, reinforcing the legitimacy of humanity's role. And yet beneath this surface calm, humanity remained acutely aware that the universe was vast and indifferent, and that vigilance was not a burden but necessity. And so the long watch continued with renewed purpose, informed by history, guided by restraint, and sustained by the understanding that the true triumph of humanity was not that it struck back when underestimated, but that it had learned how to wield power without losing itself, even as it stood ready, if ever forced again, to remind the galaxy that underestimating humans came at a cost no civilization could afford to pay. The final phase of humanity's transformation unfolded not with a climactic battle, but with a moment of collective realization across the galaxy, when the accumulated weight of years, choices, and consequences settled into a clear understanding of what had changed and why it could not be reversed. And this realization emerged during a rare full assembly of the Galactic Council, expanded now to include species once marginalized or silenced, where representatives reviewed decades of data showing reduced large-scale wars, stabilized borders, and unprecedented collaboration since humanity's rise. And as delegates spoke, it became evident that even those who still distrusted human power no longer questioned its legitimacy, because legitimacy had been earned not through domination, but through consistency, transparency, and the willingness to be judged by outcomes rather than promises. And humanity's representatives did not claim moral superiority or destiny, instead acknowledging past risks and near failures, emphasizing that their success had depended on remembering what it felt like to be dismissed and choosing never to impose that same blindness on others. And this admission carried weight because it aligned with observable history rather than rhetoric. And beyond the council chambers, ordinary citizens across countless systems live in a galaxy where the fear of sudden annihilation had receded into memory, replaced by a cautious optimism grounded in structures that worked, trade that flowed, and disputes that were resolved more often through negotiation than force. And this daily experience did more to cement humanity's place than any fleet ever could. And within human society, the generation that had known the war only through education and remembrance inherited institutions deliberately designed to resist concentration of unchecked authority, embedding oversight, dissent, and adaptability into their core, ensuring that the conditions which had once made humanity vulnerable to underestimation would never again be mistaken for weakness. And as exploration continued into deeper space, humanity carried forward not a banner conquest, but a framework shaped by hard lessons, prepared to encounter civilizations yet unknown with caution rather than arrogance, and a galaxy shaped by shared memory, adapted in turn, with new powers rising that understood from the beginning that dismissing others was not strategy but failure. And so the legacy of the conflict settled into something quieter but more enduring than victory, a shift in how power itself was understood, measured not by how easily it could destroy, but by how carefully it was exercised. And in this equilibrium, humanity did not stand above the galaxy but firmly within it, no longer underestimated, no longer unseen, and no longer needing to prove its strength through constant struggle, because the lesson had been learned, written not in ruins but in stability, that humanity's greatest retaliation against being underestimated was not vengeance, but the creation of a galaxy where underestimation itself had become an unforgivable mistake, and where the memory of that first dismissal would forever guide human hands away from hubris and toward a vigilance that ensured their hard-won place among the stars would endure.